segment, Dan talks about the approach of Daniel Walden's 90th birthday makes this a good time to sit down and preserve a record of his remarkable life. I'm Martha Freeman. I've been Dan's friend and neighbor in State College, Pennsylvania for 17 years. Earlier this year, Dan and I sat down with filmmaker Eric Hamilton to talk about his life story. The result is a collection of short films, each focusing on one facet of Dan's life. In this segment, Dan talks about growing up in Philadelphia in the 1920s and 30s. What else do you remember about just being in Philadelphia at that time, and besides going back?
I was very impressed by my brother, who 4 years older. He died about 12 years ago. Morton went to the University of Pennsylvania, and as you can see by my tie, my favorite colors were red and blue. I learned all of the University of Pennsylvania songs, Fight on Pennsylvania, put the ball across the line. I went to Franklin Field with my brother, with my cousin Bob, and with my Uncle Ben. I don't recall my father ever took us to a football game. He took me a few times to professional wrestling, which is the only thing that he cared for. And I remember the names of a few of the wrestlers. Jim Londos was a champion at the time. Oh yes, Strangler Lewis was another name. And these were in the days of clean professional wrestling. After, must have been in the 50s or 60s, I don't know, suddenly wrestling changed and people were bringing things out of their trunks and hitting people in the head with things, and all kinds of tricks and dirtiness and double wrestling and triple wrestling, and it became very uninteresting.
Where did you go in Philadelphia to see wrestling?
I can't remember. Downtown, it's one of the arenas, but I don't know. I know Franklin Field was where we went for football. I remember going to baseball a few times. At that time, the Philadelphia Athletics, the A's, were in Philadelphia, and the Phillies were in Philadelphia and still are. In those days, I saw people like Lefty Grove, Jimmy Fox, Mickey Cochran. These were the big names.
Do you remember how much a ticket cost?
No, I have no.
I mean, did you just walk in on the day of the game and you could just go?
Yeah, just walked in, and but I have no recollection of how much it cost. And I'm sure it wasn't very much by today's standards.
Yeah, it's just the game. And like, were you sitting up in the bleachers?
Yeah, always in the bleachers, sure. I didn't have much money to spend, and neither did my friends. So yes, the bleachers, that was fine. We cheered along with anybody else.
So talk a little bit about like your mom. You were very close to your mom.
Yes. My mom was a homemaker. Her name was Reba Edith. Her maiden name was Friedman, and she was the first in her family born in this country. Her father and her mother both came from small towns in Russia. Her father had been married to a woman whose name I do not know, and had 2 children. He came over on the boat in the 1890s, I would think early 1890s, and his wife died on the boat or shortly thereafter, and that's all I know is anecdotal evidence of that. He then sent for his dead wife's sister, who came over.
So he married his wife's sister?
Yes, yes he did. And then my mother was the first one born in this country, in Boston. They were in Boston at that time. And then at some point they moved from Boston to Philadelphia. And I don't know where the others were born, but she had 2 older siblings. There was Sam, Lester, Benny, Esther, I think 4 more siblings. So it'd be 4, 5, 7 altogether, I think.
And
that's
they all
great.
grew up in Philadelphia?
And they all grew up in Philadelphia. My father?
Yeah. How did Reba meet your father?
How did he meet my mother? I don't really know.
But was he also from Philadelphia?
He was from Philadelphia. He also was from Russia. He came over, I think, in 1899, 1900, something like that. He was born on or around 1893. And I say on or around because there is conflicting evidence on several things that, few papers that I have. My father had a habit of dissembling. I didn't want to use any ugly words, but he, in this particular profile, he said that he went to James Stevens High School in Philadelphia, and then he went to night school at the University of Pennsylvania and graduated in 5 years. My impression was that he dropped out of school after about 4 or 5 years out of necessity, and then he worked very hard, worked in dry goods, and worked with he had 2 brothers, worked with them, and ultimately became a very successful real estate and insurance man in Philadelphia. Their married life was abysmal. My father was an immigrant and apparently never gotten over some of the bad effects of being an immigrant in this country. He learned English and he spoke fluently. He made a few grammatical mistakes always, which made me suspicious of having graduated from high school in the University of Pennsylvania. Anyway, he was an incredibly energetic man, but he didn't share his success with his family. The likelihood is that he was a womanizer. The likelihood is that he had many other interests. I know he was a joiner, he was a mason, he was an elk, he was joined various organizations, possibly for business reasons, possibly for social reasons. He was terribly energetic, but every once in a while my mother would question why he called up and said, I'll be home at 6, but he didn't come home till 7 or 8 or something like that. And he would fly into a rage and go after, and she would go into one of the rooms and lock the door, and then there would be screaming and yelling. And Morton and I would run across the street, try to get a neighbor to stop the fracas that was going on, and we succeeded. But we always felt very conspicuous, which may be a good reason why I went so much into books, to another world, into fiction, to nonfiction, to sociology, psychology, philosophy, all sorts of things.
Do you think you were trying to understand partly
Yes.
what drove your father?
Yes, I was. Well, I was trying to understand myself too, I guess, where I stood in the world, what my identity was too. I separated myself very much from my father. He wanted his sons to go into the business with him, real estate and insurance. He had a tremendous one-man business. Apparently did not trust other people. He was not able to build a firm. He had a firm, but it was a one-man. Everything had to go through him. I remember he wanted me to marry his secretary after I got out of high school. He also wanted me to go to business school, which I didn't want to do. I did not enjoy watching him work. I saw that he was not fair with his employees, and so I did not want to go into the business. My brother did. My brother went to law school at the University of Pennsylvania, and for a while he tried to go into the business with my father, but because of my father's personality, my father never said please and never said thank you. He only criticized. After a few years of trying, my brother gave up, and he and his family moved from Philadelphia and Atlantic City, where he had a satellite office that my brother was taking care of. He moved to New York.
And so he was off working or off at the Masons or off doing whatever he was doing, and you and your mom were home, and Morton were home together, probably
Yes.
a lot.
Yes, yes.
And she was a much kinder, gentler.
She was a kind, gentle, devoted, just a wonderful woman in every sense of the word. And she was a patient lady. she endured, as she told me at one point, she endured the relationship for 20 years because of the children. And then after 20 years, she and my father were divorced, and he settled a certain amount of money on her. And then, I don't know exactly when, but maybe 2, 3, 4 years after the divorce, he married again, and he had 2 children, a boy and a girl. I'm not friendly with the boy at all. A man, of course, he's a man by now. But I'm very close to Marianne, my sister.
And divorce, this would have been in the early 40s, I would guess, and so the divorce would have been unusual. Was
the
that?
Divorce took place in the 40s. I was overseas in the Army at that time, and I heard about it by mail. And when I came back, my mother was living in a different apartment, and I think my father was living, well, I don't know where he was living. I know that he subsequently, when he, after he married the second time, he moved to a house in Margate, New Jersey, just a suburb of Atlantic City.
So it didn't have the kind of effect on you that it would if you'd been younger. I mean, it was just.
No, it did not. No.
Or social stigma or those kinds of things.
No.